Just 6 days to go for US election 2020, and we're tracking the race to the White House very, very closely here on CNBC-TV18. Record early turnout in the United States. More than 75 million votes have been cast so far, and 39 states have already topped 2016 as far as early voting goes. Big surge among young voters. You've got at least 6 million early voters in the age group of 18 to 29. That is 4 million up since 2016. We're also learning from the likes of New York Times that it's quite possible that this record surge in early voting, mail-in voting, may lead to a delay in pronouncement of results as well. According to the latest polls, and we're getting you the CNN poll, Joe Biden in a firm lead by 12 percentage points. 54% of the voters supporting Joe Biden, 42% for Donald Trump. But eventually, it's all going to boil down to those key battleground states. Florida, extremely important for any presidential candidate. And here, Biden only has a 2-point lead. And if you speak about real clear politics, then it's almost a tie. Let's move on to Michigan. This was a state that Donald Trump won last time around. And here you have Joe Biden leading by 8 points. This will be a very close race and an important race to watch out for as well. Let's get you more numbers. North Carolina, here too, Joe Biden is leading by just 1 percentage point, and these are the races that will really matter on election day. Right now, there seems to be a big fight over the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been over 230,000 deaths in the United States, and both leaders have opposing strategies to fight COVID-19 as well. You're seeing Trump trying to convince voters that he's got the COVID-19 pandemic under control and COVID-19 is vanishing and how the US is rounding the corner. On the other hand, you've got Joe Biden. He wears a mask in every rally. He asks attendees to stand apart as well. Donald Trump has been saying that when it comes to this election, it's a choice between a Trump boom and a Biden lockdown. Joe Biden, on the other hand, says we will deal honestly with the American people. So this is going to be a very interesting election. We've got the GDP numbers also coming out. The US economy growing by 33% in Q3. Let's see how this pans out and how this impacts the election campaign. Let me introduce our guests right now. We've got Sean Trend of Real Clear Politics, Charles Nuttycombe, Director, C-Analysis. We've got Jeff Chaudhary of RLC Ventures, and we've got Alan Rapport, Economic Policy Reporter for the New York Times. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Sean, if I can begin with you. You don't seem to be very excited by this record early voting turnout. You're saying it doesn't really mean much. Why do you feel that way, Sean?
Well, it's exciting in a way that it shows a high level of engagement with the election. You know, we know that turnout is going to be up. This isn't going to be a year like 1996 where a majority of Americans don't vote. So that's a good thing. I just don't think it's that predictive of how the election is likely to turn out. And the problem is we just don't know what's going to happen on election day, especially when you have a United States president who's urging members of his party not to vote absentee, stay away early. You know, they're more likely to show up on election day. So just not too much we can read into it other than the fact that turnout is going to be very, very high.
Right. And Charles, if I can get you in. So what's your analysis of the election? Just about 5 to 6 days to go now. A large amount of the votes have already been counted, almost 53% of the votes. What's your sense? Where is this election heading?
Yeah, right now it does kind of look like in our forecast that Joe Biden is the favorite. In polling averages, Joe Biden is either leading by 7.5 or 9 points. That is a much larger lead than Hillary Clinton had in 2016. And you mentioned the CNN poll where Joe Biden was up by double digits. The same poll, which had Hillary Clinton only leading by 5 at this point in the 2016 election. The early vote, I agree with Sean, isn't really predictive of, who's going to win the election and by how much. There'll still be many millions of Americans casting their vote on election day. We do know that in most states, the early voting is good for Democrats who have a lot of enthusiasm to vote in this election and are more wary of the risk of voting in person due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
So About the GDP numbers that have just come out, Jeff, and I'd like to ask you about that. This is largely due to consumer spending in the United States. But how does this really augur for the U.S. economy going forward?
Well, I think the important message to say they're largely meaningless, and the reason for that is that for the previous quarter the economy contracted by almost exactly the same amount. So all we've got here is a bounce back from a very, very low position. What is interesting is that jobless claims also were up a bit, which is obviously quite good news. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter which president we get. We're still going to get helicopter money. We're going to get easy money, and that's really the message going forward while we're still in this sort of pandemic and weak growth situation. So really, for me, and we'll probably talk about this in a minute, the election actually means nothing in terms of the outlook for the economy or indeed the stock market.
Right. Alan, if I can get you in, and this is a sector that you track very, very closely. We saw the markets reacting positively to the GDP news, but do you think it's too late to change the outcome of the election? And will this really have any impact on the US voter, considering the slowdown in the US economy and also globally?
Right. I mean, I think that the number itself is, primarily at this point just a talking point for President Trump. We saw he just tweeted about it a little bit earlier and made the point that, if Joe Biden is elected president, this great recovery is going to be in jeopardy. I think, the number looks back at the last few months and it's not really predictive of where we're going. So, beyond it being a talking point, it doesn't really reflect the fact that we're expected to see a much weaker number for the last quarter of the year, primarily because, the U.S. government, the White House and Congress was not able to come up with an agreement on an additional stimulus package. So, we're expected to see even weaker consumer spending for the last portion of the year, more business closures, and just sort of more trouble ahead because, the fiscal policy that supported the economy through the worst of the pandemic in the spring, isn't there for the fall at this point.
Right. Donald Trump has, ever since he came to power, he has been focusing on getting jobs back, Americans first when it comes to hiring skilled workforce. Do you think that plan of his, that campaign speech, the campaign pitch of Donald Trump on jobs, that's taken a severe beating due to the COVID-19 pandemic? Alan?
It has. Yeah, I mean, I think, before the pandemic, the U.S. economy had added about 500,000 manufacturing jobs, going into 2020, but now, we're down about 200,000 overall. And, you've seen, just because the overall broader economy has taken such a hit, we've seen factory closures and plant closures and the slowing of global growth. So I think it definitely has chipped away at the president's ability to fulfill that promise. We had seen a slowdown in the manufacturing economy last year, though, even going into this. So, I think that we saw a lot of the sort of blowback and the hangover from his trade wars with China and with Europe started to take a toll. And, I think a lot of the companies that he was pressuring to, stop doing outsourcing, to not move their manufacturing abroad, he kind of, lost track of those fights and paid attention to other things. And companies kind of moved on and did what they were going to do. I think economic realities and market realities kind of ended up winning out over the president's public relations campaign to, make people buy and hire American.
Right. Sean, to get you back in, we're seeing a lot of focus in the final phase on the coronavirus pandemic. Both leaders are coming up with their strategies, saying that we're better than the other. In the key battleground states, how much is a strong COVID strategy have a response on the ground?
The best thing, Donald Trump hasn't had a good week of news really since March, but the best thing that's happened to him is that this late surge that we're getting is coming late. I think if it had come even 2 weeks earlier, would have had a chance to sink in with people more and would be hurting his numbers more than they probably are right now. There is one big exception, I think, which is Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a key swing state. It's seen as one of the ones that could decide the election, and it is absolutely getting hammered with this latest surge in coronavirus. So that is a state where I think awareness and salience of the coronavirus issue is very high. And I think part of the reason that we're seeing that state seemingly slip away, I think there was a poll showing Biden up 17 in it yesterday, is probably that the awareness of the coronavirus or the salience of that issue has been bumped up.
Right. Chaz, what do you feel about the coronavirus pandemic? Let's see the approach of the two leaders. On one hand, you have Donald Trump, despite the fact that there are close to 9 million cases of COVID-19 in the United States. He said that we're rounding the corner, things are under control. He doesn't wear a mask. He doesn't ask people to stand aside or maintain enough distance from each other. But on the other, you've got Joe Biden, who always wears a mask, asks people to maintain social distancing, says that we'll be honest, our government will be honest with the American people. So which approach is really becoming popular with the American electorate, especially in those swing states? Chaz?
Yeah, absolutely. Most Americans are wearing masks and social distancing and taking the pandemic seriously. I think the, amount of people in America who, say it's a hoax, we don't need to wear masks, et cetera. They're a very small portion of the country. And those voters usually do skew Republican. Not to say that everyone who is wearing a mask, of course, is going to be voting for Joe Biden. If that were the case, Joe Biden would be up 20 or 30 points right now. But at the end of the day, partisanship triumphs. What Sean was saying about Wisconsin is very true. I was just thinking about that, about the poll that came out yesterday that had Joe Biden winning Wisconsin in a landslide. It has gotten very terrible for the people of Wisconsin, the pandemic. And I think at the end of the day, the worse the per capita in cases is in these swing states, the worse it is for Donald Trump's chances, because at the end of the day, he's the incumbent. Anytime there's a crisis and an incumbent president is running for re-election, he's in trouble. You can look at George H.W. Bush when we had a recession in 1992, which was the last time an incumbent president lost. You can look at 1980 when Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter. And you can look at 1932 when Franklin Delano Roosevelt defeated Herbert Hoover.
Right. Very interesting analysis there, Chaz. And if I can get you back in, Jeff, speaking about the coronavirus pandemic, the future growth and revival of the U.S. economy is also dependent on how the next president, the next administration, tackles the COVID-19 pandemic. Do you agree?
I mean, yes, partly. I mean, I think obviously it's very topical to talk about the COVID pandemic because obviously it's affecting lives and affecting people on the ground. But I think the bigger picture is also being misread as well, in the sense that people are still worried about the economic effect and, more importantly, the actions of the Fed. I mean, in this discussion and most of the discussions, obviously we're talking about the election and who's going to be the next president. But I think the actions of the Fed and how much easing and how much more monetary liquidity is going to be employed into the system is going to be very significant. As I say, it doesn't really matter whether it's Biden or Trump who's the next president. The Fed will continue to have to be loose, will have to continue to print money in order to get the US economy restarted. And that applies not just in the US, but across the whole of Europe, like where we are at this point in time.
Right. We're going to take a short break, but we request all our guests to stay with us. We're coming back in less than 2 minutes. Welcome back. You're watching CNBC-TV18. This is our election special. Record enthusiasm, record early vote in the United States. More than 75 million votes have been cast so far, and this is well above 53% of the votes counted in 2016. Let's go across to our panel now. Sean Trent of Real Clear Politics, Charles Nuttycombe, Director, C-Analysis, Jeff Chaudhary of RLC Ventures, Alan Rapport, Economic Policy Reporter for the New York Times. But Sean, if I can come to you now. Which states, according to you, are going to matter in this election? how many states would Donald Trump really need if he actually needs to turn around the trends right now?
So I think if you were to poll 100 elections analysts and ask them what the key states would be, they'd give different answers, but I think the Venn diagram, if you will, would have 6 states in common. I think everyone would say Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I think some people would throw other states in on the right, some on the left, but those are the key states. And they kind of break up nicely, basically, and then we can debate around the margins, but Joe Biden has to sweep those states in the upper Midwest, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. If he does, the election is over. It's very difficult for Trump to win. Trump, on the other hand, can't afford to give up any of those Sunbelt states I mentioned, North Carolina, Florida, and Arizona. If he loses Arizona, it's one of the smaller states. You can make a case for him still winning, but it becomes difficult. The bad news for Donald Trump is he seems to be down considerably in those upper Midwestern states that I mentioned. He's trailing in Arizona, and Florida and North Carolina are too close to call. So unless there's some break towards the incumbent in the closing days of this campaign, you know, it's going to be tough for him to win.
Right. And Chaz, what's your sense? Does Donald Trump need more people to come out and vote in person on election day, or it's the same for both camps?
Yeah, polls have shown that for the voters who plan to vote on election day, they skew very Republican. At this point, the president is still running a persuasion campaign, which is not good for him at this point. He's still trying to persuade voters to come out and vote for him. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign is just saying, get out and vote because they believe they have the numbers to win. You know, Sean is definitely right. You know, the states of Florida, Texas, Arizona are very important to the president's path to victory. And just a few moments ago, I read that Texas has already surpassed its votes from how many they had in the 2018 midterm election. In the 2018 midterm election, Democrats came very close to flipping a U.S. Senate seat in Texas. Beto O'Rourke came within 2.5 points from beating the incumbent Republican Ted Cruz. The polls there show that Texas is a toss-up. And usually in Texas, the higher the turnout, the better it is for the Democrats. So the president's still running a persuasion campaign and playing defense in states that he shouldn't be playing defense in. So Sean is right. You know, we have to see the polls really narrow and significantly narrow to see the president's odds of re-election improve.
And that's the reason why many pollsters would find it difficult to call the election, because there are certain races which are extremely close, like Florida and Texas, as you people were pointing out as well. But Alan, to bring you in, I think one issue because of which Trump's campaign has taken a beating is the delay in the economic stimulus package. Tell us about the facts on the ground. What were the key reasons and who are the people responsible for this delay? Now we believe that the stimulus package will be only announced after the election.
Right. Well, it's been a pretty long saga throughout the summer. House Democrats passed a package that was for over $3 trillion back in May. And, you know, Senate Republicans were very averse to spending anything on that scale. They were, you know, interested most in spending, you know, between $300 billion and $1 trillion on a much more targeted stimulus package. A lot of concern about the deficits and interest in seeing, you know, how the package that passed in March was actually going to sort of impact the economy. So there have been negotiations going on throughout the summer between Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. A lot of sort of speculation that both sides were playing politics here, that perhaps Speaker Pelosi was kind of stringing the White House along, you know, not really wanting to give President Trump a big win before the election, and sort of using her leverage that way. And, you know, the president on his part was kind of back and forth in terms of what he wanted. He walked away from the negotiations that said he wanted something bigger than Speaker Pelosi. So the talks have been kind of sputtering along. This morning, Speaker Pelosi sent a letter to Secretary Mnuchin, you know, saying we're still waiting to hear your last response. At this point, it's obviously quite clear nothing's going to get done before the election. And, I think, markets have been responding to that. There's been a lot of volatility sort of hanging on the status of these talks. But, at this point, I think, we're looking to something happening in the lame duck period or, in January, depending on who wins the election. I think if Trump loses, he'll probably be unlikely to work with Democrats at all in the next couple months.
All right, I'll take my final two questions now. Jeff, what's your sense? Who is better for the markets? Will markets cheer if it is a Biden victory? And how will investor sentiment improve, and with which candidate, according to you?
Well, my view would be really is that the markets are not going to react violently to positively or negatively either candidate. I mean, frankly, I think, my assessment is that, we talk a lot about elections and who's going to be won by, but the reality is, and we had a bit of a bounce last time Trump was elected, but I think the sort of the longer term impact is almost irrelevant. I think what's more relevant is the extent to which the two houses are controlled. Obviously, if Biden becomes president and the Democrats get both houses, it'll obviously make it much easier to pass legislation. But if we get a situation as we are now, where we've got a sort of a back and forward, as Alan just described, then it's obviously going to be much more difficult. But net, I don't think, frankly, that it's going to make much difference in the medium term about who's going to be in charge of the White House as president.
Right. And my last question to you, Sean. It is being said that because there has been a record mail-in voting, early voting, this could delay the pronouncement of the election result. Usually, most polls call the election by the night of 3rd of November. But do you think there could be a delay now? And how long could that delay be?
Yeah, I think people are too overconfident about that. There are states, crucial states like Florida, that have a record of processing their absentee ballots and early votes very quickly. I think unless it's an extremely close election in Florida, we are going to know who wins that state on election night, which will give us a pretty good indication of how the election is going. That said, if it does end up being a very close election, some of these states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, that don't have a lengthy history of processing this volume of absentee ballots, it really could drag on and turn into litigation. So if it is a very close election, closer than the polls are suggesting now, that's where you start to see the situation where the counts in the litigation drag us into December, reminiscent of the 2000 Bush v. Gore election.
And we can't rule that litigation out in case there is a Trump defeat. We'd like to thank all our guests for joining us. We've completely run out of time on this election special, but Chaz, Sean, Alan, Jeff, thank you very much for joining us here on CNBC TV18. Keep watching the channel for more news and updates on the election.